The parking lot outside the neighborhood market shimmered faintly in the early afternoon heat, rows of cars catching the sun in bright, restless flashes. Margaret Hale pressed the button on her key fob, and the trunk of her silver sedan rose open with a soft mechanical sigh. She set a paper bag of peaches inside, careful not to bruise them, and steadied herself against the rear bumper as a wave of weakness passed through her knees. A thin plastic hospital bracelet circled her wrist, still bearing yesterday's date. Beneath her blouse, taped just below her collarbone, a small cardiac monitor sat quietly against her skin, sending its steady signal back to a hospital across town. She had been discharged that morning, 6 days after open surgery, with a folder of instructions she hadn't yet had time to read twice. Across the parking aisle, Linda Watkins sat in her SUV with the engine running, watching Margaret over the top of her sunglasses. She had seen that silver sedan in the neighborhood for years. She knew exactly whose driveway it usually sat in. She picked up her phone anyway. "There's a woman here with some kind of electronic device," she told the dispatcher. Her voice pitched just right. Calm enough to sound reasonable, urgent enough to be taken seriously. "She's using it on a car. I don't recognize her." "Did you see her force entry into the vehicle?" the dispatcher asked. "No," Linda said, "but she's got this device. Do you see a weapon?" Linda glanced at the purse hanging from Margaret's shoulder. "I can't rule it out," she said. Those 4 words did more work than anything else she'd said. A call that should have been logged as a welfare check became, in the space of one vague sentence, something the system would treat as potentially dangerous. Officer Ryan Mercer's cruiser rolled into the lot, 11 minutes later, angling in behind Margaret's sedan so tightly that she couldn't have backed out even if she'd wanted to. He stepped out slowly, one hand resting near his belt, and studied her the way a man studies something he's already decided about. "Ma'am, I need you to place the electronic device on the ground." Margaret looked down at the key fob, still in her palm. "You mean my car key? Place the device on the ground." She set it down without arguing, then straightened carefully, one hand still braced against the trunk. "This is my car, officer. My registration is in my purse, if you'd like to see it." "Who normally operates this vehicle?" "I do. That's not what I asked." Margaret tilted her head slightly, more curious than offended. "Then perhaps you could run the plate. It would answer your question faster than either of us guessing." "I'll decide the order we do things in," Mercer said, and turned his shoulder toward his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a subject with an electronic access device, possible unauthorized vehicle." Ordinary words, filtered through a particular kind of language, could sound like something else entirely. A car key had just become an access device. A grandmother buying peaches had just become a subject. Officer Lena Ortiz arrived 2 minutes later, parking at an angle that gave her body camera a clean view of the open trunk, the grocery bag, the sedan, and the small aluminum cane leaning against Margaret's hip. "Ma'am, I need you to set the cane down," Mercer said. "I need it to stand," Margaret said simply. "For officer safety, it needs to be out of reach." Ortiz watched as Mercer moved the cane several feet away, well past where Margaret could lean for it, even if she tried. "I was discharged from the hospital this morning," Margaret said, her voice steady, but her balance clearly less so. "I can't stand unsupported for very long." Mercer's eyes flicked to the plastic bracelet on her wrist. He noted it. He did not act on it. "Medical statements don't change procedure, ma'am." Nearby, a young man in a delivery uniform paused with a stack of pharmacy boxes balanced against his hip. Jamal Reed had made enough deliveries to recognize the small rectangular outline beneath Margaret's blouse for exactly what it was. "Sir, that's a cardiac monitor she's wearing," he said. "I've delivered dozens of them." "Step back from the contact area," Mercer said, without turning his head. Mercer motioned for Ortiz to take Margaret's purse. As she lifted it from her shoulder, the grocery bag beside it tipped, and peaches rolled across the hot pavement in soft, uneven bounces. A prescription bottle skittered after them, along with a laminated card that landed face up near Ortiz's boot. She crouched, and before she could say anything, she saw it clearly. The vehicle identification number, the license plate, and beneath them, printed in plain block letters, the registered owner, Margaret Hale. Mercer reached down and took the card before Ortiz could speak, sliding it into a clear evidence sleeve without looking at her. "This proves the car is mine," Margaret said. "It establishes a document association," Mercer said. "The key opened the trunk. Electronic access can be copied. I have my insurance card as well if that would help. We'll examine documents once the scene is controlled." Ortiz glanced toward the mobile computer mounted between the front seats of Mercer's cruiser. The plate query screen sat dark, untouched, exactly as it had been since they'd arrived. She said nothing. Not yet. Margaret shifted her weight, one hand pressing lightly against her side. "I'd like to sit down if that's possible." "You can sit once you're secured," Mercer said, unclipping his handcuffs. "I underwent surgery 6 days ago," Margaret said, still calm, still precise. "I can't bring both arms behind my back. It isn't a refusal. It's simply what my body can do right now." "We can secure her in front," Ortiz offered. "Standard procedure is behind the back," Mercer said. He guided one wrist into the cuff, then reached for the other, pulling it back farther than Margaret's shoulder could comfortably follow. She bent forward against the trunk, breath catching audibly. 200 miles away, on a monitor at the hospital's cardiac unit, a soft alert chimed and a line on Margaret's chart shifted from green to yellow. Her knees buckled a moment later. With her hands locked behind her, she had no way to catch herself, and she went down hard near the painted parking line, her shoulder taking the worst of it. She lowered herself to the ground. Mercer said into his radio. She had not. The narration of that sentence would matter more than either of them understood in that moment. Ortiz took a step toward her. "Maintain the perimeter," Mercer said. Jamal had already stepped away from the boxes, phone pressed to his ear. "I need to report a medical emergency," he told the county dispatcher. "Elderly woman, recent surgery from the look of it, sweating heavy, struggling to breathe. She's in police custody in the market lot on Cypress." He gave the location and the unit number stenciled on the side of Mercer's cruiser. A second record entirely outside Mercer's control had just been created. Mercer helped Margaret to her feet and walked her toward the rear of his patrol car. The molded plastic seat had been baking under direct sun for the better part of an hour, and the door hinge groaned as he opened it. Ortiz left the door propped for a moment, letting air move through. Mercer closed it. "Can't leave an unsecured subject exposed to the public," he said. Inside, Margaret's voice came muffled through the glass. "I need medical help." At his terminal, Mercer typed with 2 fingers, the way people do when they're building something they intend to be believed. Subject lowered herself to ground following detention. Subject now claiming medical distress. Possible attempt to delay transport. The system stamped the entry with the exact minute it was written. He believed he was protecting himself. In fact, he was doing the opposite, leaving behind a precise permanent record of exactly what he had chosen to believe and when he had chosen to believe it. Inside the car, Margaret's breathing had grown shallow, her lips losing color. "She was talking fine 2 minutes ago," Ortiz said. "She wants us to interrupt the detention," Mercer said, not looking up from the screen. At the hospital, the yellow alert on Margaret's chart deepened to red. A nurse dialed the emergency contact number on file. The phone rang, unanswered, inside the purse, now sitting in an evidence bag, on the hood of Mercer's cruiser. When no one picked up, the nurse escalated the alert to the outside monitoring service, and another timestamp landed in a system Mercer had never heard of and could not touch. Within a minute, that service placed its own call to emergency dispatch. 3 separate systems, none of them aware of each other, were now recording the same emergency from 3 different directions. Ortiz walked to the rear door and opened it without asking permission. "She's going gray," she said. "She could lose consciousness in there. I might not survive the ride to the station," Margaret said quietly, each word costing her visible effort. Ortiz crouched beside the open door. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Margaret gave her a phone number in a voice barely above a whisper. Ortiz dialed it on her department-issued phone, The call automatically attached itself to the incident record the moment it connected. A man answered on the second ring. "This is Adrian. Sir, my name is Officer Ortiz. I'm calling about a Margaret Hale. She gave me this number." "That's my mother," the voice said, calm in a way that made Ortiz sit up a little straighter. "Where is she right now, and who's speaking to me?" "She's in the back of a patrol vehicle, sir, in the market lot on Cypress." "What's the incident number?" Ortiz read it off her screen. "Has medical aid been requested?" "No, sir, not yet." "Has ownership of the vehicle been verified?" "Not yet." A short pause followed, the kind that felt heavier than any shouting could have. "Don't alter anything already entered into the record," Adrian said. "Request medical aid immediately, and make sure the original event history is preserved exactly as it stands. I'm on my way." Ortiz looked at the caller display still glowing on her screen, at the title attached beneath the name. Chief Adrian Hale. She didn't say it out loud. She simply requested the ambulance and stepped back to wait. Because of Jamal's earlier call, the ambulance was already 3 minutes out. Arriving before Mercer had any chance to shape what officials would see first. Captain Sarah Bennett's car pulled in right behind it, and she was out the door before the engine fully stopped. She opened the rear door of the cruiser fully and stepped back to give the paramedics room. Paramedic Eli Turner knelt beside Margaret, checked her pulse, her oxygen level, the pallor spreading across her face, and reached immediately for his oxygen mask. "We need to move her now," he said, and the urgency in his voice needed no further explanation. While the paramedics worked, Captain Bennett walked to Mercer's cruiser and held out her hand for the terminal. "I need the incident history." She scrolled through it in silence, 3 entries rising to the surface in sequence. The hospital's monitoring alert, Jamal's independent medical call, and beneath both of them, time-stamped after each, Mercer's own entry describing Margaret's illness as a possible attempt to delay transport. The medical alert existed before Mercer had ever typed his accusation. Captain Bennett read that timestamp twice, then closed the terminal without a word. Adrian Hale arrived 12 minutes later with a woman in a gray blazer beside him, a slim folder tucked under her arm. This was Nora Blake, an independent investigator assigned to civilian oversight. Before Adrian approached the ambulance, before he looked for Mercer, before he said anything at all to anyone standing in that parking lot, he turned to Captain Bennett. "That's my mother in the back of that ambulance. I'm recusing myself from any disciplinary decision connected to this incident, effective immediately." "Understood, Chief," Bennett said. "I want every piece of this preserved. Body camera footage from both officers, dispatch audio, terminal entries and their timestamps, the hospital's monitoring alert, the caller's original recording, any revisions made to any report, and the vehicle query log, complete, including anything that was never entered." He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Mercer. He did not need to. Only once every piece of that had been confirmed did he walk toward the ambulance doors. Margaret, an oxygen mask now resting over her nose and mouth, met her son's eyes and managed a small, tired nod. "Did anyone ever check the car?" she asked through the mask, the question landing softly, but settling over the lot like something much heavier. No one answered. The silence said enough. Over the following days, Nora Blake assembled the full chronology, piece by piece, record by record, refusing to let any single account stand on its own. Linda Watkins's original call was pulled and reviewed. She had described Margaret as unfamiliar, despite years of seeing that exact car parked outside the same house on her street. She had admitted on the recording that she saw no forced entry. She had admitted she saw no weapon. Only offered a version vague enough to raise the danger classification of the call itself. The department's network logs showed no interruption in service at any point that afternoon. The plate query screen in Mercer's cruiser had simply never been opened, not before the handcuffs, not during the detention, not until paramedics were already on scene. Margaret had identified herself and stated her ownership before Mercer had even removed the cuffs from his belt. The registration card matched her name to the vehicle exactly. Mercer had disregarded her recent surgery, forced her arm beyond what her body could safely manage, and left a young, otherwise capable officer waiting for permission to act on what she could plainly see. Ortiz had recognized the danger before that rear door was ever closed. She simply hadn't acted on it soon enough. Jamal's call to county dispatch stood as an independent, unprompted record of visible medical distress, made by someone with nothing to gain and no relationship to either officer or victim. And running beneath everything else was one contradiction that would prove impossible to explain away. In one written statement, Mercer said Margaret had failed to identify herself. In a second statement, filed 2 days later, he said, her identification hadn't been sufficient to establish lawful control of the vehicle. The body camera disproved the first claim entirely. The missing query log undercut the second. He hadn't told one lie. He'd told two, and they didn't agree with each other. The formal review convened 11 days later in a conference room at the department's administrative building. Long tables arranged in a rectangle, a wall-mounted screen ready to display the chronology piece by piece. Margaret sat beside Nora at the front, dressed simply, her hands folded, her composure entirely her own. Adrian sat in the public row near the back, present as a son, present as nothing else. Because of his recusal, he had no vote here, no access to the closed deliberation that would follow, no authority to shape the outcome even if he'd wanted to. Mercer sat across the room beside a union representative, his posture rigid, his expression carefully arranged into something between confidence and defiance. Captain Bennett opened the proceedings. "We're not here to accept anyone's conclusions," she said. "We're here to read the sequence in order, exactly as it happened." They began with Linda's call, playing the recording in full, then displaying beside it a bulleted summary of what she had actually witnessed. A car she recognized, no forced entry, no weapon. A deliberately vague answer that had escalated a routine encounter into something far more dangerous than it needed to be. They moved next to the vehicle query log. A panel member, studying the blank entry where a plate check should have been, asked whether a technical failure might explain the gap. Nora placed a certified network report on the table. "There was no interruption in service at any point that afternoon," she said. "Fleet Services has already confirmed the system was fully operational." The reviewer asked for that confirmation directly from Fleet Services. "It's attached," Nora said, sliding a second document across the table. Page 4. The room fell into a brief, methodical quiet as papers turned. Margaret spoke for the first time since the hearing began. "Please continue," she said, calm as ever. "I'd like to hear the rest." They turned next to Officer Ortiz. Captain Bennett asked her directly when she had first recognized that Margaret's condition might be serious. Before the door was closed, Ortiz said, her voice steady but quiet, "I saw the bracelet. I saw the color leave her face. Why did you wait to act?" "I didn't want to contradict him over the radio," Ortiz admitted. "I should have opened that door the moment I noticed." The panel noted plainly that she had not initiated the detention and that her instincts had ultimately been correct. But instinct that arrives too late to matter still carries its own weight. Fear could explain the delay. It did not erase the responsibility that came with it. As the hearing continued, the language on the screen slowly changed, each phrase replaced by something closer to what had actually happened. Ownership concern became detention without completed ownership verification. Citizen concern became unsupported caller inference. Subject lowered herself became restrained patient collapsed. Claiming medical distress became documented cardiac emergency. It wasn't dramatic, it was simply accurate. And that accuracy did more damage to the original story than any accusation could have. When the panel reached Mercer's written statements, his representative requested a brief continuance, suggesting his client might wish to provide additional context. What additional evidence would that context include? Captain Bennett asked. "He may want to clarify certain details," the representative said. Nora placed both statements side by side on the table, the contradiction visible, without a single word of commentary needed. Failed to identify herself. Identification insufficient to establish lawful control. Beside them, she set the transcript of the body camera audio, time-stamped, showing Margaret giving her name and stating her ownership well before the handcuffs were removed from Mercer's belt. Beside that, the query log, showing the plate requests submitted only after paramedics had already arrived on scene. "Which version requires clarification?" Captain Bennett asked, looking across the table. No one answered. That silence, more than anything shouted in the parking lot or written into any report, was the moment the case truly closed. The board's decision came several days later. Officer Ryan Mercer was terminated for cause. His badge access, database credentials, and vehicle authorization were disabled the same afternoon the decision was finalized. The findings were referred to the state's police certification authority, a step that would follow him regardless of where he applied next. His supervising commander lost report approval authority, pending a broader audit of prior detentions signed off under his watch. Officer Ortiz received a suspension, mandatory intervention training, and a formal note in her file stating clearly that she had recognized a medical emergency, had the physical ability to act, and had waited for permission from the very officer creating the danger. Linda Watkins's recorded statements were referred to the appropriate authority for review of possible false reporting. No conclusion was reached that day. The evidence had simply been placed where it belonged for someone else to weigh. In the weeks that followed, the department adopted a new procedure for any vehicle theft call that risked becoming a custodial detention. Before restraint could occur, officers were required to complete a database check, compare available documents, weigh the reliability of the original caller's account, and screen for visible medical risk. A supervisor could override that sequence only with a documented reason and an attached employee identification number, and every override would be reviewed on a recurring basis. Any officer or witness reporting visible medical distress could no longer have that concern dismissed by the same officer managing the detention. Later edits to a caller's description, a subject's ownership status, or a person's medical condition would remain permanently visible in the record, layered beneath the original entry rather than replacing it. Adrian did not sign the new policy. His name never appeared on it. Captain Bennett's did. 2 weeks after the hearing, Margaret stood at her kitchen counter, a small paring knife in hand, cutting the bruised section from the last peach out of that grocery bag. She set the good half into a bowl and rinsed the knife under the tap. In a drawer beneath a stack of utility bills, an unremarkable folder held the full hearing packet, findings, transcripts, and all. She had read it once. She had not framed anything inside it, and Mercer's name appeared nowhere on her walls or her counters. She closed the drawer. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, a message from Adrian asking whether she'd taken her evening medication. She plugged the charger into the side of the phone, typed a single word back, and set it down. Home. Somewhere in a filing system now, permanently, sat a chronology no one could quietly rewrite, timestamps that had spoken for themselves when no one else would, and a record that finally matched what had actually happened rather than what one officer had needed it to say. Staying quiet that afternoon might have protected the rest of Margaret's day. The record she never asked for, built by a nurse, a delivery driver, a young officer's hesitant honesty, and a son who refused to touch the outcome, was what protected whoever came after her.